One of the original concepts of Archnemesis was that players would know what a rare monster does, that is, clear communication of gameplay. That was...
The Alpha Chad rare monster, dude. You gotta watch out. You gotta, instead of Archnemesis, we're just gonna have Giga Chad monsters. They're just gonna collect...
G'day folks, Ziggy here. Let's chat fixing Archnemesis. Now, I harbor no illusions that GGG is gonna watch this video and then go make a bunch of changes, but
True.
I do enjoy chatting about
They don't
game
give a
design,
fuck, dude.
and maybe some dev does get an idea.
At least he admits that.
helps
Okay.
them somewhere
That's
down
good
the
going
line. You never know. Anyway, since its
Well, we do know.
implementations, Archnemesis has undergone
Let's
a
be
bunch of
real.
patches,
We
and
do
there have
know.
been some solid improvements made, such as reductions in the number of rares encountered at once and the recent defensive stacking nerfs. But I'm sure that many of you, like myself, feel that mostly it's just gotten less egregious. I'm sure it's even started getting to the point where some of you actually don't mind Archnemesis, which is fine, totally. Most days,
No, I
someone
mind.
comes into my stream and says they actually
Fuck
like it now.
Archnemesis.
However, most of the time
No.
when I actually dig a little deeper
Absolutely
into that
not.
thought, the reason why they like Archnemesis is that it makes the rare monsters more interesting, challenging, and rewarding. And this is a goal that I personally agree with. But here's the thing. While Archnemesis might well be achieving those aims, I do think there are better ways to actually do so. I wonder how much better the game would feel if Archnemesis managed to make rares more interesting, challenging, and rewarding without spamming us with on-death effects, slows, ground effects, and so on. If its mechanics were better communicated and understood by the players. If gameplay was more clear overall, and if rather than being annoying hard, it was
Okay.
fun hard.
Okay, dude, you're like Ziggy, like, bro, you're on some medical fucking grade copium right now. That's not something that GGG can accomplish. They can barely do one of these things. Okay, they haven't been able to accomplish any of them with Archnemesis so far. You're talking like golden era, like the fucking stars aligned, getting all of this shit to happen at once. So I don't know, dude.
Because I think that's what it actually
Tell
comes
me about your
down
copium
to.
supplier.
There are two major kind of difficulty in games. Abrasive difficulty, the kind that makes things harder in ways that annoy and frustrate. And the other kind is joyful difficulty, the kind that drives you to improve your gameplay or character, the kind that leaves you feeling super satisfied when you take down a tough boss. And when done well, this kind of difficulty even makes failing entertaining. A lot of Archnemesis's difficulty, unfortunately, is that abrasive, frustrating kind.
Yep.
It's not that rares are challenging, it's the way in which they are.
That they're unfair.
So let's talk about 3 different routes to improving Archnemesis. The first route is the route that I suspect GGG is currently taking. Keep Archnemesis mostly as it is currently designed, and keep rounding off the rough edges, polish and slowly pick away at the worst modifiers and the things that players complain about the most, until people eventually stop complaining. Now this route may well eventually achieve the desired goals of making rare monsters more interesting and
that's
challenging,
exactly what
and
they're
eventually
doing.
do so in a way that doesn't cause too many problems. Obviously, I'm not really a big fan of this route, and that's for a few different reasons. First, complaints will get fewer and fewer over time, both because things are getting better, but also because
People
the people
quit.
with the most feedback might simply have stopped playing. Secondly, the end result is likely just a very diluted version of a poor system.
Yeah.
One that's mild enough to not offend, but also one that's not really enhancing the game as much as it could have
Yeah.
been if it had begun from a better starting point.
Who would have thought that if they give us this terrible mechanic that literally I don't think anyone likes, like I genuinely really feel like almost no one actively enjoyed Archnemesis ever. It was a underwhelming base league mechanic, and then they forced it into all parts of the game. It was almost globally hated, and they just said, well, that's too bad. And they've just been forcing it into the game and left it there, and they haven't done anything about it. What's up, McFly?
And so the second route is to recycle Archnemesis with a different implementation. Let's go through a couple different steps here. Step 1. Start by paring down the list of Archnemesis modifiers massively. There are around 70 Archnemesis modifiers. Look at this list. It just goes on and on. Also, look at how many things each
Only
modifier
70,
actually
dude?
does. It's just so much. One of the original concepts of Archnemesis was that players would know what a rare monster does. That is, clear communication of gameplay. That was...
Yo, even thinking about that is hilarious, bro. Like, The fact that one of the original goals of Archnemesis was to try to make it so that players had an idea at a glance of what was happening to their character. Oh, that's hilarious, dude, because it absolutely has not achieved that almost at all. Like, most of the time when Archnemesis kills me, it's just because I'm like, wait, what does Archnemesis, what does Malediction do, bro? Oh, it's increased damage taken, so I'm not Reflect immune anymore. Oh, cool. Thanks. Yeah, wonderful, thanks.
It was clearly lost somewhere along the way. I mean, it's easy to see how that happens. You just keep adding cool ideas until you end up with a massive list like this. A lot of these modifiers overlap anyway. There are 7 different modifiers that deal lightning damage in some way, for example.
Yeah.
Also, I'm sure that many of you agree that there are some mods that are just a bit...
Actually, why are there so many Archnemesis modifiers? Now that I think about it, yeah, that's a really good point. Why do we need so many different ones, right? Why didn't you focus on making like 10 good ones? Right? Like why wouldn't you focus on making like 10 good ones instead of like 20 or 30 just mediocre ones? Yeah, true. Actually good point. Because if there were like just a few but really, really impactful and obvious modifiers, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, because then you could be like, oh yeah, I've got that one. Oh yeah, I know what this does, right? But currently the way that it goes is there's basically just 500 different modifiers, and you can just get these random combinations that do all kinds of crazy stuff that you can never really ever prepare for, right? Like, think about all of the massive amounts of different combinations that you can do, right? If an Archnemesis can have up to 4, and 3 of those can be pretty much anything, right? Like, there's obviously higher tier ones and lower tier ones, but there's like thousands of combinations. So it's like, how do you ever legitimately prepare for that? I just don't think that you can most of the time.
Or that you don't really even know what they do or why they're there. So I'm suggesting, step 1, cut this list down, remove some of the weaker designs, duplications, and so on, until you've gone from around 70 mods to at least half that, if not lower.
Yep.
And this change goes hand in hand with step 2. One of the reasons why so many mods are actually needed is that they stack up to 4 on a monster. But I would propose that this is actually a bad design choice. Having 3 or 4 modifiers on a rare monster also makes it hard or impossible at times for the player to actually identify them and understand what they're going to be facing.
Yo.
It's only really possible to spot...
Yo, did I pre-watch this video? Like, I pretty much just made the same exact points that he's making right now. Whoops.
1 or 2 visual effects on a monster when you're actually playing, and that's not even talking about when you're fighting a legion, which can have like 10 or more rare monsters at the same time, that each have 3 or 4 different Archnemesis modifiers. So, step 2 is limit rare monsters to 1 or 2 modifiers max. Have a limit of 1 throughout leveling campaign, and then in endgame have rare monsters have a mixture of 1 or 2 Archnemesis modifiers. Make them a bit tankier if necessary to compensate, but each rare only has 1 or 2 of only the better mods from the heavily cut down list from step 1. Quality over quantity.
Yeah.
Step 3 then is to make each modifier have a greater impact on the rewards, requiring less lottery number combinations of modifiers to get decent rewards. This would serve to smooth out the current issue with spikiness of rewards, where average rewards are heavily skewed by certain rare combinations in collaboration with stacking quantity and rarity bonuses. This is where you see people dropping stacks of 10 Divines and Exalts.
Yep.
Hopefully smooth that down to having a reasonably rewarding Archnemesis monster every map instead of every 10 or 100 maps.
But bro,
finally, if all
need
this
those
works
moments
well,
of,
you could consider
excitement.
then adding a pair of passives to the Atlas tree. One of them would allow you to raise the Archnemesis modifier cap to 3 to occasionally get super spicy rares with more rewards. And another keystone that instead lowers the cap to 1 at endgame. This would be for players that simply don't enjoy the system that much, or who need the game a bit easier for their build and don't mind trading
I'll just take both. Get the best of both worlds,
to get
right?
that way. Or even just for people who want to stack challenge and rewards elsewhere in the game, not on every rare monster. All of this combined is kind of my dream implementation of the current Archnemesis concept.
Dream is a good word for that, because it's never gonna happen, bro. Like, I wish, like, if I channel like the purest grade copium that I possibly can, I mean, all this sounds good, right? And I agree with what you said, Corey. These are just like the painfully obvious things that you could do to fix Archnemesis in various ways, and it's just super, super unfortunate that we're probably just not gonna get any of this. I do think that we are most likely just going to get straight up, well, we're just going to keep rounding off the edges and hoping that it makes it less annoying to the point where people stop complaining. I really do think that's what we're going to get.
Modifiers, a list of mods cut down to the better ones on the list, more consistent rewards, and greater control over the gameplay impact the system has through the Atlas passive tree. That said, what about that third route? This would be if Archnemesis was scrapped as a concept entirely, because maybe it's not the best way of achieving the goal of challenging, well-communicated, and rewarding rare monsters. Maybe Archnemesis makes the game too much about Archnemesis modifiers and not about the monsters themselves.
Maybe?
My final route suggestion...
Maybe, Ziggy? Maybe? No, I think that's like I think it's like a definite. Like, that's a like, yes, that is what's happening, right? Like, Archnemesis has completely warped the game around itself 100%, to the point where they have, instead of just nerfing or changing the way that Archnemesis works, they have changed, like, historic ways that the game has been balanced over the course of the last 10 years. Like, they've removed 10 years worth of balance to loot and drops and the system that we've had and all of that. They've removed 10 years of that balancing just to be able to force Archnemesis into the game. So absolutely, it has warped the game around itself 100%. Not even a question.
Then is the highest effort, admittedly, but maybe highest reward long term. Make the monsters themselves strong, interesting, and challenging. Harken back to yesteryear, where we were afraid of the monsters, specifically the Devourer, the Drop Bear, the Tentacle Miscreation, and so on. There's a bunch of ways that this could be done, but my idea is that occasionally you would run into a pack of monsters being led by an alpha, and that alpha is the rare monster, and that rare monster is tougher and more dangerous and more mechanically interesting.
The Alpha Chad rare monster, dude. You gotta watch out. You gotta, instead of Archnemesis, we're just gonna have Giga Chad monsters. They're just gonna collect. It's gonna be like that one, the Backrooms game that have gotten really fucking popular recently. It's like, yo, I'm being chased by this giant rare Giga Chad Devourer mob. We're gonna have that instead of Archnemesis. Is that the Uber Nemesis that you were talking about earlier, Yay? God.
Than the normal monsters around it. Right now, rare monsters can be everything. Shitty little crabs, generic bandits, a plain old skeleton, and so on. It's actually really hard for these monsters to ever matter, because they simply don't do anything.
Yep.
So, it's easy to see why GGG would make a system like Archnemesis, because it's a modular way to make sure that every rare monster, even shitty little crabs, can do some mechanics at you. But it'd be so much cooler if rares were only the more interesting monsters in the game.
Yeah, like,
instead of a
like for real, I 100% agree. In conceptually, right? Like the concept that GGG is trying to go with the whole Archnemesis thing, it is conceptually sound, right? I really do think that it is a good thing. There's a reason why pretty much every other ARPG has used some kind of similar system to this, because it achieves a certain effect. The problem is just that their implementation is just really, really, really poor, in my opinion. And this is something that needed, like, way more time in the oven, right? Like, it's completely underdone. It's, like, mushy and gray and just not cooked all the way through. Like, this needs a lot more time before we
rare
have
skeleton
it just in the game,
The rare monster
right?
of the skeleton pack is the Necromancer. And the Necromancer is bigger and badder than before, and even has a few new abilities. Maybe some different summons and even an offensive spell. What about a pack of crabs then? A giant alpha crab that spits water and slams down giant claws to sunder the earth is the rare of the pack. Maybe it's got little holes on its shell and other little crabs come out of it. What about bandits? Instead of a generic bandit rare in amongst all of the other generic bandits that just walk up and swing their swords, you instead get a bandit leader with a bunch of skills akin to a tough and powerful rogue exile. The minor zone bosses in the campaign are actually kind of like this idea.
Yeah.
Imagine if rare monsters were closer to them or closer to rogue exiles in design.
True, dude.
I'm certainly not suggesting that maps should be filled with bosses. Don't get
That's actually, I don't think I've thought of that, and I don't think I've heard anybody say something like that. That would be so much cooler. Like, if we just got actually well-designed, stronger versions of the base mob types. Like, if there was just, like he said, like a Giga Chad version of the mob type, right? Like, if that was just the thing, and that was, you know, they were designed to have specific mobs that worked around, or specific mods that worked with them, And, you know, then Archnemesis mods, instead of being like game altering and game changing, they could just be game augmenting, right? Like it was just more simple modifiers. You could still have very rarely like have those like Solaris touched mobs show up or have like those kinds of things. Like that would be fine, right? Like I'm okay with those things existing, but the fact that every rare is just a random assortment of like, well, what bells and whistles can I attach to this mob and just have them like crap out 500,000 projectiles and various random things and move at the speed of light while doing infinite damage and being unkillable. Maybe there would be a little bit more nuance to it, maybe just a little bit, but I do agree it's really, really hard to implement
that idea. But
like
certainly
that.
the most interesting and scarier monster bases with a few improved and new ones thrown in would make better rare monsters than generic crabs with a bunch of disconnected Archnemesis modifiers. We'd actually once again then be fighting the monsters themselves, rather than those disconnected Archnemesis modifiers, where half the time we don't actually even pay attention to what the monster itself is. The communication of gameplay would be a lot better too. It's much easier to learn and understand what the giant crab or the big necromancer does than trying to identify which of the slot machine of Archnemesis modifiers each random rare rolled. Well, those are some of my ideas. They probably have some glaring issues and may well be a bit unrealistic at times.
I mean,
after all, I'm just
not really
developing from my comfy armchair here
Yeah.
without actually having to execute what I suggest. But nonetheless, maybe you found them interesting. Maybe you want to share some of your ideas in the comments below as well.
No. But yeah, I mean, I 100% agree, dude. I think that there is definitely some there's definitely a lot of good there. And I think these are obvious things, right? Like when you just try to think really basically of like, well, how can we make this not feel terrible? It's just so obvious. But what I'm assuming is actually happening, right? What I'm assuming the problem with doing all of that is just the fact that GGG have dug themselves into this just developmental hellhole. Like they are straight digging to China, digging to like fucking hell, whatever you want to call it. They've dug themselves so deep in this developmental hole that it's really hard to pull themselves out of it, because they've got like half of the team working on PoE 2, half of the team working on whatever the new league is supposed to be, and it's just like leaves like random interns and stuff to be able to get stuff actually done, you know? So it's like, I don't know, man. Like, it just seems like they're biting off way, way, way more than they can chew. And they're trying to double dip in that they're trying to put out leagues to like generate resources and also spend a ton of resources on PoE 2 at the same time. It's kind of not working so well. So I don't know. We'll see.